Welcome to today's business clinic on attracting students to online classes. I'm here with Marj Hahne. And just a tiny bit of housekeeping. This is a free session, so all of these free sessions get posted to my YouTube channel. There's not really any follow-up per se, although you will get an email reminding you that it's on YouTube. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Otherwise, I am sure to miss them in the chat if you were to put them in the chat. But definitely make use of the chat as you wish to connect with other people attending. And like I said, I'll try to keep an eye on it, but obviously I have a lot of work here to do today in talking with Marj. So now, before we get to the presentation, I do want to thank this month's sponsor, which is Plotter. Plotter is a cloud-based software that helps you plot your books. It's a very focused on plot and structure. This is actually a tool that I've used a little bit myself. I think it's ideal for fiction writers. Since I'm not one, it's not something I continue to use, but I do know other authors who use it. Especially if you have multiple timelines in your story, you might be interested in Plotter. Okay, so thanks to them for sponsoring my newsletter, Electric Speed, and these sessions. And Marj is reminding me her name is pronounced like March. Thank you for that. All right, so about Marj. Marj is a freelance editor. She's a writer herself, and she's been a writing teacher for many years. She has an MFA degree in poetry, and she started teaching webinars in March 2019. And we are going to be looking at her website. For those of you who would like to go ahead and pull it up and learn a little bit more about what's going on with Marj, just go to marjhahne.com. And when Marj submitted her clinic application to me, this was part of what she told me. She said, "I'm discouraged by my seeming inability to grow my business by attracting more students or different students without having a traditionally published poetry book or memoir. I'm daunted by what it takes to publish and promote a book in the current lit biz climate, so I resist finishing my current project, even though I know it would help propel me as a writing teacher. I need more money for less time so that I have psychic space to finish my book and feel motivated doing that promotion game." Now, there's certainly more I could tell you, but this was kind of the crux of the issue that Marj sent to me. And at this point, I would just like to turn it over to Marj and see if there's anything she would like to add, any context, any background that you think our audience would want to know about you.
No, this is pretty much it, Jane.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course. So the one question I want to address or issue or complication, which I think might in fact get in the way of what we are eventually going to discuss, is how much a published book would actually matter to the success of your online classes. So just to repeat what was in that little description for those people who might have just kind of missed it or might have been, not paying attention. There's a relationship here between attracting more students or different students, yet not having a traditionally published book or memoir. So I encounter this thinking a lot, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but there's a belief that if I only had X credential, if I only had a published book, if I only had an MFA degree, if I only had a New York Times bestseller, whatever, like there are so many things that people believe they ought to have in order to teach a class or to do something. But certainly in the context of what we're discussing today, it's about teaching a class, being more successful as a teacher, earning a living from that. And I have seen people for sure publish books, even self-publish them in order to support a business of this type. Now, so here comes the but, I guess. I don't think you necessarily get the boost you think you do. And I'm not talking about Marj specifically, but anyone in this position by having a book out on the market. So I just wanted to interrogate that a little bit, Marj, and see if you could be convinced or persuaded that maybe the book, like there are lots of reasons to publish a book. I would be concerned if this were your main motivation. So I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
I can be convinced that that's misguided thinking. It is my sense that having a published book as a credential is a passport to invitations,
Yeah,
more exposure,
sure.
more book readings, more panel invitations, more cred to create those things
Yeah.
and be given yeses.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
in poetry, particularly in poetry, it's none of us are getting rich off our poetry book.
Exactly.
So it feels like the passport.
Yes. I think I'm so glad you brought up the poetry piece because I do believe that in that community, especially if we're talking about the more literary MFA university community, 100% everything you said. Um, However, as we move forward, and we're going to be talking about kind of your targeting and who's coming to the classes, who might come to the classes, um, people who are outside that community, MFA, university in particular, that's the people I'm mostly focused on. How much do they care and what's their primary concern? And in my experience, working with students is that they're mainly interested in your effectiveness as a teacher. Yes, they of course they want you to have credentials. They want to feel like you're not some fly by night. That you know what you're talking about. But when I look at your bio, which we're going to talk about really shortly here, when I look at what you've accomplished, you're not like a 22-year-old graduate from an MFA program who just started yesterday. Like you are established. Um, and I'm those who followed me for a long time know that I also don't put a lot of emphasis or priority on having the book because there's so many other ways that we can write and publish and have an impact on the world to change people, to influence people that aren't about the book. But yes, certainly in the MFA side, I see why that can be important. So, um, do you have any response before I move on from that piece?
Only, Jane, in that the obstacle still feels to be that no matter how many free events I hold for people to
Mhm.
experience my teaching, I can't get in front of enough people in the ripple effect of promo.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm stopped there.
Yeah,
I can't get the more.
yeah. And you feel like a book would get you some of the opportunities that would lead to the broader exposure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back to the slides here and just kind of give people a sense of how I'm going to tackle this. And I do believe you can be successful in getting new, different students better income from the classes without doing the book. Um, and I do have some specific guidance for you on how you might create more time for yourself potentially to do the book. All right. So if you want to get more students for classes, before you think about, I call it lead generation, like doing free stuff, doing marketing and promotion, that you would reach that larger crowd who hasn't spent even a single dollar with you. I call that lead generation. Before we get to that, it's absolutely imperative that we look at the foundation that you're presenting to those people. So that includes the website where people are going to find out about the classes, the emails that you're sending out, and then the marketing copy for those classes. Then we want to look at the packaging and the pricing of what you're offering. Is what can we do there? Is there anything that would especially help you with the earnings side of this? Then we'll talk about positioning, so what you're offering and to whom you're offering it. And then finally, we'll talk about the lead generation. Now, my suspicion is that when you first reached out, you were thinking about the last bullet point most of all. I don't know if that's true. Um, but I want to start with, because you could do all the lead generation in the world, but if the foundation isn't there, it's going to fail. So that's why we start there. Now, before I continue, I do see a pretty interesting question in the Q&A box from David, where he says, is it that people have actually read your book or just the fact that you have a book that counts? Now, my perspective, Marge, is that it's that you have a book, whether or not people have read it. Is that your take as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the organizations and institutions that are, for lack of a better word, gatekeeping,
Yeah.
would say yes to me more readily.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So I want to visit your website first. So I'm going to stop the slide share and pull up a browser and then share that instead. Give me just a moment. Okay. And Marge, just for my own benefit, so I can be reasonable in what I suggest, do you make your own changes to your website, or do you have someone that does this for you?
I do. I
Okay,
had someone set it up and I make the changes.
great. And is this it seems to me, because of the webinar piece, you're very accustomed to getting in there and making changes. It's not like this huge problem for you.
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so one of the first things I would consider is adding an about page. So, in other words, a bio that is what I call the copy paste bio. The copy paste bio is in third person. It's essentially what might get read for you at a reading or a panel or some other opportunity. It would be the sort of formal bio that would go in your book when it's published. It's, I don't want to say it's just the facts, like it can have voice and style, but I'm thinking that it's going to tell people why they should trust you, essentially. So I'm looking here for credentials, your publication record, how many years you've been teaching, indications of social proof that you have taught. I don't, by this point you've taught lots of classes, thousands of students, I imagine, that sort of thing. And if it's written in the way that I have in my head, the fact that the book doesn't exist will not enter people's heads because you've got a really well-established body of work and the experience as a teacher and a writer. Do you have this bio somewhere written already and it's not on the website?
Not to the degree I have the 50 word, 75 word that you submit with a literary submission.
Mm-hmm.
I know now what to do to expand it, Jane.
Okay, great.
Thank you for that.
So I'm thinking this will be a tab of its own, like next to webinars or, however you want to do it, but obvious, like people don't have to go searching. It's not nested under something else. Because I think that's definitely, I know from experience of hosting other instructors, people want to know who the person is and if they can trust them. And my belief is that it's not dependent on a book, but certainly that can help. All right. So on the homepage here, we've got what I do like about the homepage is that it's very direct. It doesn't go on and on. It's pretty disciplined in my experience of what you're trying to do, I think is focused in the right places. Now, I did learn from you prior to today that 90% of your income is webinar driven or class teaching driven, not necessarily, and maybe 10% is the editing and the coaching. Now, if it were me and that were my income breakdown, I would make the homepage focused on the classes. I wouldn't even put editing and coaching there, but that's really up to you. I don't think that webinars are suffering in any way. Just to say that I think there's more room here to let's say you could have the next featured class or the next most important thing that you want people to register for. I could see that being on the homepage here instead of one of these other boxes. Now, the other thing I would strongly encourage you to do that's not on the homepage, but it is under webinars, is testimonials. So this is where students say very nice things about you and you put it in your marketing materials, you put it on your website, etc. The page is loading. Here it's coming. And there it is here at the top. This is the testimonial. Do you have more of these?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Do you have permission to use people's names, or could you potentially get
Yes.
permission? Okay. Fabulous. I want to see those testimonials so badly. I want to see the names. I want to see the smiling faces. Um, and if also, if you have students who've gone on to publish something, even better. I'm not a requirement, but even better, because then you get to talk about your clients' success stories. Um, so I would put some of those testimonials right here. And then I would have a link where people could click through to read more. And then for each webinar, I do encourage testimonials from people or class testimonials from people who've been in that are specific to the experience of that webinar or that class. It just goes a really long way to reassuring people that this is tested and it helps them understand who it's for. And if like, because the people are like, whether consciously or not, they're thinking, am I like this person? Am I going to have the same experience? Will I, have this takeaway or this change? Okay. Now, the other thing that I think would be helpful, and again, here I'm trying to do work that minimizes the need for the book or the desire for the book. There's a trick that gets used on many, many websites. I shouldn't call it a trick. It's about marketing. It's a marketing tactic where you say, as featured by, as you see here on mine, NPR, the Authors Guild, the New York Times, etc. Things that I think people will appreciate, helps raise my profile and stature. So I know you've been published in enough places and have been affiliated with enough organizations, et cetera, that I think you could put a very nice grouping of those yourself right on your homepage, or it could be on the webinar page if you're just focused on the places that you've taught, that sort of thing. What do you think about that, Marj?
I think that's a great idea, Jane. All of this is a great idea. I think I'm not aware. Of course, I'm not aware when people visit the website what they're deciding or if they even
Yeah.
are. You know what? I'm
Yeah.
not thinking about that. So I appreciate all of this.
Okay. Now the other thing, this is more the things I've talked about so far, I feel like it's pretty straightforward. I think they're really quick wins, and I think they would have a lot of meaning to them as far as getting new people to say yes and to give you a try. The next one is it's a little bit more, I don't want to say advanced because you could do it quickly, but it has to be done well. And this is having a header design. So where we see the book, having a header design that somehow is unique to you, your aesthetic, what you want students to feel or take away immediately from the experience they're going to get from the classes. So, for lack of a better word, a brand. So, there's nothing wrong with your current header. And I don't want to mess with what's working because it's clear and direct. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity here to have something that includes, for instance, your face. Um, and just the feel that we're entering territory that fits what we're looking for. Um, Now you can ignore this guidance and focus on the next piece of guidance, which is related to the webinars, because this will be as important, if not more important. I think you need some marketing images for each webinar or each series that you offer. So, for example, just to be clear about what I'm talking about, I'll go to my site. So this is what I mean. This is a pretty small image. as expressed in this page design, but that's what I mean. Do you create anything like that?
I don't, and probably my not being tech savvy is an obstacle. So and so I'm game though, Jane.
Okay.
Absolutely game. You're right. This is one long scroll through, and
Yeah. It's a
it's
lot.
cumbersome and not inviting. I got you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you already know exactly where I'm going. Two thumbs up. It's just a matter of doing the work. Um, Canva is what I would suggest. If you don't feel tech savvy, Canva has templates that will help you get up and running with something. The only thing I suggest is don't reinvent the wheel each time. It can be the same design, you're just swapping out a few elements. And I'm just going to show you what my Canva looks like so you get the full effect here. Um let's see. Okay, I have one big file for this. Let's go down. Can I do this? Yeah, there we go. See what I mean? It's just the same design, tweaked a little bit each time. So do not reinvent the wheel. Just pick the font you like, stick with it. Pick the layout you like, stick with it. And then you will start to develop a brand in that way. Now, you could hire a designer to help you do this. And it may take you a little bit of time before you kind of land on what you like. It certainly took me a while to develop this. But I think this also would be hugely valuable for attracting new people. All right. Now, you do have everything here on a single page, and it's long. At least for like, I'm approaching this as someone totally new to your classes. So I didn't so those listening know, I didn't know Marge's classes before she reached out to me. And so when I was first looking at your page here, Marj, I was like, wow, this is a lot to digest. Um, and certainly adding images are going to help break that up. But even more than that, what I would recommend is something along the lines of what I do, which is a quick list. And I don't have a good list here because it's the end of the year and I haven't put up the 2024 classes yet. So it looks paltry. But you can get a better sense here below the fold um, of what I'm talking about. So we've got a quick list, but if people want the full description, they're going to have to click through for the marketing page. So I have a full dedicated marketing page for each class. And it's pretty extensive. And the rule of thumb here is that, in my mind, the higher priced the class, the more detail you need on this page. And so this is a fairly high price class, although truth be told, I have the same template for even the $25 webinars. But once you have the template set up, it doesn't take any time at all to create a dedicated page for each offering that you have. So that's something else I would do so that this page is more of a quick look at what you have or what's coming, and then people click into a fuller description of that class. What do you think about that?
Perfect.
Okay. So let's see. Just going down my notes here on what I wanted to say about your website. Oh, you did have a newsletter sign up on the homepage. Um, and you've also got one here in the footer, and that's fine. All of that, no problem. But I would collect email addresses somewhere on this page for people who want to be alerted to new classes. So especially since you do list what's coming up, you have it in the pipeline section. So I think it would be I mean, you actually have a register buttons there, but I would definitely, it's an opportunity to get people on your list to just say, if you want to be alerted when new stuff comes up, sign up. All right. I think that's all I have to say about the website specifically. Marj, do you have any questions for me about the site or what you should do or not do? Anything that bothers you, you've been anxious about?
Um, no, I, I'm, I really buy that this needs to be more focused on the webinars rather than them seeming equally weighted with the other.
Yeah.
Um, so no, I'm good, Jane. I buy everything you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a question from Cindy. Would you encourage professional brand development in this case, like paying someone to do this brand work? I find that this is strange, but I find it such a difficult question to answer, because I find it's personal. It's based on how much money you're earning, based on your goals, and based on your skills. Like, I think it's within reach of many people to do some of the basic branding work themselves. I have never hired someone to do this work for me, but I also took a lot of graphic design classes when I was in college because of just personal interest. And I kind of like doing this work. But that's not everyone. And some people have really terrible skills and they can't do it well. So, it's one of those, it really depends on the person we're talking about. Um, Marj, since you have 90% of your income coming from this, that tells me that it could merit hiring someone, but I'm not necessarily encouraging that. There was one time that I hired a professional designer to do some brand work, simple brand work. It wasn't even like global brand work. And I was so disappointed with the results, I didn't use it. And I think that has also influenced my aversion to recommending it. So, Marj, do you have anything to say? I don't know if you have experience hiring someone.
Well, I actually was thinking, and I see too the Q&A about the question about the green. I do want to actually, when you just want to redo your whole wardrobe, I feel
Yeah.
that way about this website.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think I definitely feel I need to hire. I know whom I can hire.
Okay.
And for all these reasons, Jane, I really appreciate this.
Okay,
It's
good.
time. It's
Okay,
time
good.
for a makeover.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I support you 100% of that. Another design related question: should Marge remove the color green in her text on the first page? She mentions green is the number one color to avoid for the visually disabled. Oh my goodness, I didn't even know that. And I've been talking about websites for a long time. So I guess that will be part of the makeover, Marge. Being aware that green can be problematic. I better take a look at that for my website, in fact. Okay. Andrea has a question that might be useful to answer just so everyone has the context we need. She wonders if all of your classes operate as webinars. And she adds, I do find Zoom meeting classes allow more connection back and forth, which helps students feel recognized and helped, and then helps with them referring other students. But she adds the caveat, Zoom meeting classes are probably best for smaller groups. So unlike this one, for instance, which is, I consider it pretty large. We're at almost 100 people live, and that can get really unwieldy in a meeting style. But Marj, are they all Zoom based, and are they meetings or webinars?
I think I may not be understanding the question, Andrea, because I know, Andrea, you run those like folks gather to write. So I don't know if you're asking, is it practically speaking in Zoom's functionality, meetings versus webinars? I always schedule everything as a webinar, and I probably would do that even if it was a writing group.
Mm-hmm.
But are you asking, Andrea, that why don't I offer freebies where folks gather and it's more democratic
I
and
think
do that as word of mouth? Is that or that establishing that kind of community?
I think what she's referring to is that in a Zoom meeting, and that's the technical term for it, you see everyone else on camera and
I
everyone else.
understand. I
Okay.
move all my attendees into panelist mode.
Oh, so they're all panelists in
Yeah.
your webinar.
Yep.
Fascinating. Okay. So you can see them and they can speak. Okay. So I think what Andrea is saying is that she just finds it's more, collegial and maybe more warm fuzzy. You get more of the warm fuzzies when it's not run like the way I'm running this. So yeah. And I would have for some reason I don't have any evidence to support this from what you gave me, but I always assumed you were running them as kind of meetings or where people would be seen and they could be heard. Okay, so let's move on to email. Oh, wait, one last question and then we'll move on to email. Cynthia is wondering how frequently should we update or overhaul our website with new colors and branding? I mean, I haven't overhauled my design in quite some time. It's been the same basic design. But I would say if, usually you start running up against barriers when your site hasn't been I hesitate to use the word overhaul, but if you haven't changed your website theme in 5 years, if you haven't really done anything about the structure of the site while your career has then grown, it's probably time. So if you feel like you're hitting the limitations of it, or if it's no longer serving your needs, I would think about it. But it's really hard to say because some sites are more highly designed than others. And so sometimes the really simple site designs can be timeless and you might not have to overhaul it. Okay, so let's talk about your email marketing because you do that. You've got a list of 500 to 600 people. I just need to bring up those examples. Bear with me for a second. There we go. I'm going to do share screen on this as well. All right, so this is one of the example emails that Marj sent me. And remind me, are you using MailerLite, MailChimp?
MailChimp.
MailChimp. Okay, so using MailChimp to send these. And we've got a little opening note from Marj. And then we go into the sessions. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think by and large, these are doing the job that we need. The only concern I have really is about the readability of the linked titles here, because when they turn into links, the color changes. And so that can impair readability and it just makes it creates this tiniest of road bumps. And with marketing emails, I try to eliminate every single road bump possible. So what I would do, Marj, is instead of linking the title of the class, I would put a nice juicy button at the bottom of each class that says something like find out more, register, etc. So that's what I would do to remedy that issue. And then also with the colors, just be super careful. They're starting to edge onto a little bit of what I would consider a darker color. So if you still want the color there, I would just maybe lighten it a touch to make sure that it's not impeding the readability. But other than that, this is kind of what I would expect exactly from what you're doing. And here's the second email, again, with an opening note. And you can see the format repeats itself. Marj, is there anything you want to add about these emails, your experience, any questions you have about the email marketing you do?
Actually, I do.
Okay, great.
I'm sure it's all debatable. I know that there's the idea that people don't want to always be sold to. And the truth is, I know people read through my chatty preambles, but it's always going toward a sale. And I don't get a whole much more chatty than that because I don't want to be, there's too much email in my own inbox. So I'm not sure I 100% buy that I should be once in a while chatting with my list and not trying to sell something. And I'm just really struggling with how do I think it's my biggest obstacle is I'm kind of prickly about how I want to be sold to, emailed, and all those things, how much I'm willing to pay for things, and all those constraints I have from myself or rigidities or whatever, I don't want to do what I wouldn't be willing to tolerate. Do you know what
Sure.
I mean? It's in my way. I'm aware of that. And that's one of them. How to do my emails.
Now, do you send any other emails that are more editorial in nature, like it's just content, or is this it? Is this all you
No,
send?
no. It's also why I don't even want to do Substack. I'm just really aware that I signed up for Substack, I received Substacks, and I've unsubscribed from all of them. So I need a shift in how I relate to all this, and how to even, I'm just overwhelmed with email. And maybe it's time to hire an assistant. I'm aware that something's in the way,
Yeah.
that may mean a big leap in how I run my business.
So, just for the short term, I want to take the pressure off and say I don't necessarily think you need to start a whole new email program apart from what you're doing as far as class registrations are concerned and facilitating signups from the people who already know you or have interest in what you're doing. I think it's actually a blessing or a service, however you want to think about it, to get an email that is just about here's what's coming next. It's not pretending to be anything that it's not. It's just here you go. You asked to be alerted to this. I know you're interested because you've taken my classes before or said you would. Here it is. And so, just to kind of reinforce that, I'll show you what I send. Um, I I didn't even begin sending. I call this a pure marketing, sales and marketing email. Pure because it has no other purpose than to sell you a class, and I don't mince words about it. Now at the top, I do offer a little reminder. You're receiving this message because you've been a student or you asked to be alerted to this. And then I give people a link to unsubscribe at the top because it is a pure sales and marketing email. And I know that people could be annoyed by that, or maybe they didn't realize they were on this list or could get on it. And then it's just the list of classes. That's it. And I get the best open rates from this. Sometimes the open rate for that is better than the other stuff because people aren't burdened by it. Like if they're not interested at the moment they receive it, they're like they just click delete, but they don't unsubscribe because 2 months from now they might be interested. So I think it's actually a really like I said, I think it's a blessing for people when they know exactly what's being done. There's nothing coy about it. Now, that said, here's the big caveat. I have other newsletters that are just really more or less editorially driven. I've got a blog, and those get sent out via email. So it would be comparable to having a Substack. Um, and those also drive a lot of class registrations. And I'm not even talking, these aren't really hard sells. It's just like, at the bottom of the email, I say, here are the upcoming classes because I think you might want to know. Um, and so it would be helpful from a lead generation perspective, which, I've put into the back of this presentation. It would help you to have something that was editorially driven. And then at the end or in some sort of PS is the magic way to sell something. If everyone wants to know in an email, put a PS after your personal note. Everyone looks at the PS first. That will help. But that raises so many other questions about, okay, what will this newsletter be about? How much time will it take away from your book writing? How are you going to build that list? And so you start opening up this can of worms. And that's not what today's session is about. But I am doing a clinic next month on Substack, and a lot of the things we talk about in that class will be broadly applicable to all types of email newsletters. So you might want to catch that session. Do you have ideas today about what sort of email editorially content driven newsletter you might want to do? I mean, you have or have sort of a blog, the marginalia.
That I haven't written anything for yet, really.
Right.
I do, Jane. I have things that I could talk about.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will say a lot of people will put pressure on themselves to write an email that's somehow worthy of being sent. And so that sometimes means I have to make it long enough to be worthwhile to send. The email does not have to be long. In fact, the shorter often, the better. Again, less of a burden. People finish it quickly. It's refreshing. They get a little nugget of wisdom. Ah, that was nice. I didn't have to struggle to get through it. So don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to like do this 1,000-word, perfectly polished essay of some kind. Not necessary. Okay, I'm going to get off that.
Jane, I
Yeah.
do have a question or a comment. And,
Mhm.
how I currently do it is because I want to limit how many emails I send. So let's say I create a semester of workshops, which is that first email. Hey, this is what's going on September through December. That's the first 4 to 6 weeks out, usually 4. Then when I get closer to the start date of one of them, I then will do what might be bloggy about thinking behind this webinar.
Yes.
Then I send a reminder for each webinar that's more the quick and dirty. Hey, just a reminder. I get so many registrations from that last thrust, that last chance email, but I'm already sending, that's already 3 or 4. I guess I don't know how many emails I can send without exhausting
Right.
people, because I do that for every,
Yeah.
I'll
I,
send 3 per event.
yeah. I hear you, and what you're doing is very standard. So, and this describes every class I have ever been associated with. The highest enrollment is within the last couple days before the class starts. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but it happens to everyone. And I wouldn't stop sending those last minute reminders. I would probably continue. Um, but I don't want to get too in the weeds of like how many, but I think I would say you know more at this point than I do about the tolerance of your list. You just develop that wisdom over time of seeing just, how your list moves and breathes and climbs or falls, you know. So I trust you to do the right thing. Okay, let's go back to the slides. We talked about email marketing. All right. So here is one of my big suggestions that I'm not sure you're going to like. And so I apologize. Um, your titles, can you change them? Because they are so literary. They are so literary, which I would expect from what I know about you and what our exchange is. I would totally expect that. Um, and here I'm just going to trot out the cliche. The horrible cliche about literary people is they never say what they mean. It has to be poetic or clever or artful or whatever. And I'm just say what it is. Say what it is. And so here I've got your original titles on the left, and on the right, I have the more direct version. And the reason I suggest this is, especially if you're looking for new students, different students, um, people don't often slow down to actually see what the class is about. If they only see the title, will they understand if it's even for them? And so, like, learn and launch a generative break, like, I have no clue. I don't even know if that's a writing class. Now, if I saw it in the context of your website or something, yes, I could make that assumption. But I'm just thinking, things breeze by so quickly in people's lives. Will they even understand what that is? Especially someone who's new to what you offer. Are they going to grasp it? Now, I used lunch break here, first draft on your lunch break, only because, like, I know that people on the Pacific Coast aren't going to be doing it at lunch, but I think you get the idea of what I'm going for there. I'm looking for like the benefit or the outcome or the change people will get right there in the title. Now, I will add the caveat here that you can have a really clever, poetic imaginative title. But then, if so, have a subtitle that that's direct and more sales oriented, and make sure that if it's, if you've got some marketing images or something, make sure it's in the marketing image too, or there's some image that makes it really clear what people are going to get out of this. And so you'll see what I've suggested for each of these. I'm going to pause there since I'm fearful of your reaction. What do you think?
No, I'm cracking up, Jane. See, this is where I am applying how I roll to how people roll, which is that anything that's fresh actually stops me. You know what I mean? I've heard it all before.
Yes.
So I have to get out of my own feet. I
Yeah.
get this. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Now you do some really cool stuff. You do stuff that I haven't seen other people do. I mean, like not in webinar form. So like the visual artist spaces for literary expression. This is essentially you're taking an artist or a piece of artwork and using that as inspiration or as a jumping off point for the writing practice. It looks amazing. Um, but I don't get that from the original title. Um, Hybrid, well, for those who attended my nonfiction book proposal class earlier this week, you already know I don't like the word hybrid. So I took that word out for that class. And then for Poem a la Mode, that title might be fine because your subtitle does a great job. So, that's really more subjective. And I thought that looks great, honestly. Okay. Any questions on this, Marge, before I continue?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Now let's talk about packaging and pricing. Now, everyone has a different experience and they sharpen their skills, I find, with one sort of offering. And a lot of you know me for the one-time webinar offering at a really low price, and then I get really high volume. I have mastered that, and it's what I prefer. It is a preference. Like, you can make this work however you want. That said, if you're trying to get new and different students, I think it's by far easier to do it with that one-time class at a fairly accessible price point where people can see if they like you, your style, your wisdom, etc. I find that people are really resistant to taking a new class because so many online classes are disappointing. I'm sure everyone attending today has fabulous classes, but I hear a lot of disappointment stories from students. So everyone's waiting to be disappointed. And so it takes a while to get them over that hump. So that then they take one and they're like, oh, that was actually great. I want to take another. And so you catch them with the lower priced or that one-time offering. So the choosing the best voice class, this 3-hour $59, I think if you have more of those, that to me is a really good way to both potentially increase your earnings, reduce your time, and get new students. I think it satisfies several of your goals. That's not to say that others are not valuable. It's just that they're pretty significant commitments from my perspective. I think it's really hard to get someone to commit to something over a 3 or 4 month period. And that's essentially what those 12 sessions are. And I also think you tend, at least again, in my experience, unless you're a known name or you have some reputation that precedes you, it can be hard to get people in for something that spans over 4 to 6 weeks, unless the class is offering something that people got to have it. And by that, I mean, they got to know how to write their query. And this is their solution for learning how, or they got to know how to blah, blah, blah. I find that your classes aren't necessarily in the I must have this to make progress. It is in more the discretionary bucket. So that's why I'm making the recommendations that I am. What are your thoughts so far on this, Marge?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Jane. And I know that the single session are the way to go in terms of numbers. It takes me a lot, and I'm not defending, it takes me a lot of time to research new
Yeah,
classes.
yeah,
So at this point, I'm like, I don't want to put in that energy, but I get that I must.
yeah,
And then these other ones, are real good for people who buy into me already and they actually
Mhm.
just want a weekly structure.
Right.
So, but this
Right.
is about new and different. So, that's a long way to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
The other hack you can think about, like if there's something that you really like, this really needs to be 6 hours and it really needs to be split across a number of sessions, is it possible to pack it into a weekend? That's another way to try and, for things that you really can't do it in one session. Nobody would want it really if they understood. That's something else to consider. All right, so I want to address the goal of trying to get more money from each offering. And the classic strategy here is there a premium level? Is there a critique tier for those who might be willing to invest in the additional guidance? And this is where I look to you, Marj. Do you feel like there is something additional? And I did see there was one of these where I think you had an add-on for a discussion group or a critique group of
Yep.
some sort,
Yep.
which that's great, especially if there's interest there. And there's usually, you can tell yourself by response to the class, because people will start asking, oh, can we have a networking group, or can we have a one-on-one with you, or can we have X, or can we have Y? And then that's the premium or critique tier. But it's
Mhm.
better, of course, if you can do it as part of registration and also limit it. So it's only available to 4 people or 8 people or whatever you think is appropriate, which then also builds in scarcity, exclusivity. People are getting something that others aren't. So do you think this is a tool that you could use more?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Jane, that supplemental session for Poem a la mode was went so well. I'm going to do it now for every single webinar. Um, and I'll just say, because I also saw a comment in the chat or the Q&A. Again, it's when I sign up for a webinar, I want you to pump me with content. I
Yeah.
don't want half of it devoted to writing time. I don't need writing. I need content.
Right.
So I have a thing about overcharging when I know sessions are already devoted to a lot of writing time, which those generative ones are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it took me the longest time to think it was okay to charge for critique groups because so many people can get them for free.
Yeah.
And so I structure the critique groups as really seminars, and I'm very heavy-handed and instructional in them. So anyway, I hope that sort of answered the question, but also
Yeah.
explained the constraint for me about charging more for certain courses.
Sure.
But it seems like having people choose to have more of a community conversation after a webinar fills a lot of needs that I don't actually build into the webinars
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. I You had almost a throwaway thought there about people can get critique for free, and it's true that I find that professional writers who've been doing this for a while probably have a critique group or a trusted critique partner. That said, I find that a really early stage problem for writers is finding a critique group that's not harmful. And being able to help someone find the critique group that's run well so they understand what a good critique group looks like, that is golden. So I just want to say, like, don't discount any offering or help you might offer people on their critique side, because it can be very tough for people to, especially early on, to figure out what a good structure looks like and what good feedback looks like. You need someone there with a strong hand saying, let's ignore that advice from student A, done politely, of course. Let's focus on this instead. Okay. So I want to talk about Pomade. I don't think we've really mentioned this specifically. There was Poem a la mode, but this is a little different. This is an 8-session intensive webinar on writing poetry. It really caught my eye, also because of what you said. So you told me new poets actually need a whole new framing of how they relate to language as artistic medium, poem as literary art, not self-expression. So I designed and have delivered twice now, once a year or so, an 8-session intensive called Pomade. Since then, I've limited the takers of my critique group to folks who've taken Pomade, which allows me, for my own integrity, to justify charging folks for my facilitation of critique groups, which I actually call seminar critique, which we've covered a little bit. All right, so here's why this really this really attracted my attention. 8 sessions is a lot, but you have identified something like a prerequisite or some like a lead generation thing that could get you more money per student in something else like a critique seminar or maybe even other offerings. So I was just wondering, can we play with this more so that it's not asking so much of a new student up front, especially
Yes.
someone who wants to work with you on poetry? So these are some, I'm just throwing out ideas. I don't know which one is right for you, but I know you were struggling with selling self-studies, which I haven't covered here because everyone should know it is insanely hard to sell self-studies. Insanely hard. I'll leave it at that. That's another business clinic. But I think for this, you might be able to do it successfully. So the model here to take a look at is Marion Roach Smith, who last time I checked, if you wanted to really get into her hands-on stuff, like what I would consider the really valuable stuff with her online, you have to take a self-study first. So you could use that as, the hurdle. You could also run it more frequently in a more manageable time frame. So I think that would, all of this depends on how many people you think might be, well, how much potential is here waiting to be unleashed. Not sure. But it does lead me to just point out, this is another one of these psychological barriers that I think online instructors have. More like there's this tendency to, oh, I can't charge more unless there are more sessions. But you can totally charge more. Sometimes the fact that it is condensed and delivered in an intensive way allows you to charge more because people do not have time for the longer version, so you're saving people time ultimately. So I just want to put it in your head that more sessions isn't necessarily better or the way to increase your price or to increase your earnings more generally. All right, I'm just going to pause here for a second, take a breath. Marj, are there any questions you have for me before I switch gears and move on to positioning?
No, I'm really happy, Jane.
Okay, great. So I'm going to pick on you for a moment. And this was not, I don't think this was on your website. But I think it was mentioned when you said you had been working with maybe a small business coach and you had settled on your niche. And your niche was writers truly serious about improving their literary craft. And for me, this was it was too mushy. That's the picture of mushy peas. Uh, because you can't really advertise against that. Like if you were going to advertise for lead generation purposes, I don't know how that helps you. And it might be like your internal like compass for what you're trying, like the people you ultimately want to reach, the sort of students you want to have. But from a marketing perspective, promotion, the goals that we've set out, it's not helping you. So that's why I want to just kind of chuck it for the purposes of positioning and look at the positions I see that would be valuable. And these are not, it's not like you have to pick one. It could be all of these, but just from what I witness in your classes, you have the best online classes about poetry that are accessible for everyone, or that would be my interpretation. The best online classes for writers who love art and photography. The best online classes for those doing experimental work, literary work, literary or lyrical essays, or perhaps mixed genre work. It's in my experience, unless you're like looking at the really literary, super literary MFA sort of classes, I don't see a lot of these in the webinar space. So I think if new or different students are coming to you, if they saw this as a position, like if this position was reflected in the class titles and what's on your website, in your bio, et cetera, I think you would totally get more interest and buy-in because there are people I know who are interested in this, and you can advertise on this basis if you were to advertise. What do you think?
It's brilliant.
Is there one that do you feel like all of these are in your interest area? Do you feel like there's one that you're doing more than the others?
Uh, no, I could buy all three of these. The one thing that makes me a little worried is that, again, it's my own credentials. If someone were to Google my name, they would see that I have no experimental lyrical essay published online. And the reason why I feel confident in my teaching how to rigor around craft is not because I'm a competent poet, but I know that I'm an excellent editor, and so my relationship to language use is where I have my confidence in teaching the rigor.
Yeah.
And I get that that's in the way, Jane. Um, but I guess I'd be worried about someone again thinking, well, who are you to teach me
Yeah.
about experimental work? I see nothing by you online.
Right. So my position on this is that you can totally teach these sorts of things on the basis of your poetry credentials, your facility or expertise with language, your skills as an editor. And these are all things that can be, I think, quantified in various ways or qualified by testimonials, um, by the poetry you have published. And also, I think it's totally okay to address this in the marketing description. I think it's Allison K. Williams, and I think she might be here today, who says, if you've got a weakness or something that you think is in the way for a student, put bells on it. Just say, you may have noticed, I haven't, I don't have like what makes me, well, you could say, what makes me qualified to teach this class, which might be, a part of the marketing description for a lot of different classes. What makes me qualified? Why are you going to learn from me? And you can say exactly what you told me. And I think people will believe you. And especially if it's paired with testimonials, um, I think people will give it a chance.
Thank you.
Now, here is one of the things that I first thought when you sent in your clinic application and you mentioned you taught webinars on poetry. I thought, oh no, because I don't consider poetry classes income generating because poetry isn't income generating. Um, that said, this is my own belief getting in the way, um, because I think there are countless students who they're looking to refresh their perspective or explore their creativity or do something different or get back to something they once enjoyed and have lost hold of. Um, and for me, it's all about the marketing. I think it's totally possible to position yourself or the class in a way that helps get over this hurdle or chasm. And I think we've discussed some of the ways to do that. That said, I do think some of the best potential for you is, as far if you want to increase your earnings and attract new and different students, is to do more of what we just discussed. If you're able to, get rid of the imposter syndrome or why would anyone believe I have the credentials for this? I think that's the bigger issue than my issue, which is how can you make money on poetry? Maybe if you're trying to publish the poetry, that's where you have to get, your speaking and poets make a living by teaching. So there we go. All right. So the last step now, finally, is thinking about the lead generation. After we've assessed all of the rest of it, we're ready for this. And this is where we talk about the marketing funnel. So, how do people first become aware of you? When they get to your website, they're considering you. They convert when they actually make a purchase. And then when they come back for the second class, that's loyalty. So, those are the different stages. And my sense is that you might right now have, I don't know for sure, but the problem you expressed to me is maybe an awareness problem, maybe a consideration problem. I'm trying, before we got to this slide, I just wanted to make sure that we've got the funnel right in terms of consideration and conversion. So some of the like really easy ways, like the 12 session stuff, I'm just wondering, have you ever experimented with giving people a freebie to that to like kind of whet the appetite, see if they might want to do more? Is that it might be a
That,
little technically challenging to make
that's a
sure.
great idea.
Okay.
Yep.
The only caveat there is I don't know if people would try to slip in a second time without paying, but there are some tech solutions to help you avoid that from happening. April to me, like if you were trying to gin up poetry interest, April for me is the big marketing time or the big marketing opportunity. That's where I would think about what free sessions could I offer, ideally in partnership with other organizations. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I know you did some sort of April poetry challenge, or maybe it was a pandemic poetry challenge, but I know you've done something like that before. I'm not suggesting though that like you do live sessions or Zoom sessions, but I'm thinking more along the lines of like poem a day in April or something that would, get people um, interested in a day-to-day or a week-by-week poetry experience. The other fun thing to do, at least I think it's fun, is to do free, brief critiques of poetry or prose. And this could actually constitute an email newsletter or a Substack. If you're comfortable on video, it could be an Instagram reel, it could be YouTube. But that often, like people love to get their work critiqued. And then another thing to consider is, depending on your own poetry reading practice and how many new poems or poets you discover, or how many you just have sitting in a folder that you love to talk about, having like a brief 1 to 2 minute social media post. And I'm thinking Instagram reel, because you said you're sort of okay with Instagram, just having a section of the poem from an artistic perspective, just as a way to get people familiar with your style and how you present. Because especially with online classes, I think it's really helpful to have something that shows you on video so people get a sense if they're going to enjoy learning from you. Have you done much in, I didn't get the sense that you did much in the way of social media.
I have a YouTube channel, Jane, where I hope people check it out because I pair poems by other people with dogs, craft beers, craft spirits, and coffee. I started during the pandemic. Um, the issue, and I see that I could expand that channel with this last bullet point. I love it. Um, again, my concern is how do I get people exposed to it? I used to be on Twitter and I'd even, tag the poet, hey, and I just didn't get any energy around it.
Yeah.
So, and again, I think it's because, well, I'm a nobody, and I get it. I gotta get over that. I don't know how to, here's why. It's just terrible. I hate being tethered to this device.
Yeah.
And I'm just so resistant to spending more time on it. It's in the way.
Yeah. I totally understand. And so, like, a better marketing practice for you might be rather than social media, it might be more Substack oriented if you're open to doing more writing instead of like being on video. So I think for me, it's always about there's more ideas than time to do them. So pick the ones that you think you can sustain. And or that aren't going to be sapping your energy for the other things that you need to be doing, whether that's teaching classes or writing your book. So I would just say, and I guess the rub is whatever you do and sustain, hopefully it's effective as lead generation, because if it's not effective over time, obviously we don't want you spending time on it. So, all right. So the next consideration, which would also, I think, it could be very beneficial, is seeking out new partners. And I don't know how much you actively seek out new partners or partner with existing people who are familiar with you, but I did just like a top of the head brainstorm of places to think about, or maybe you've already gone. Lit Mag News is interesting to me because they have a lot of guests that contribute to it. It's really focused on the poetry, lyrical essay community, and it seems very open and friendly, and it's a growing community. So that seems very ripe, maybe for you to do something. Chill Subs is like a new place to find markets for your work that strikes me as quirky literary like you. Robert Brewer at Writer's Digest, he's the former editor of Poets Market. He's a published poet himself. Um, I don't know what he's actively doing on the poetry side for Writer's Digest, but there might be something there you could do with him. LL Barkat at Tweet Speak Poetry has a Substack, and I don't know what her editorial planning is like, but she, I think, would be another natural partner in the poetry space and the lyrical writing space. And then there's always AWP, but it's massive. And I've never had any luck partnering with them, but there they are. And if you're looking for other ideas, I would say if you haven't done a student survey before, like to your email list, it might be worth doing a survey and seeing who are they following, who else are they taking classes from, et cetera. And so that maybe that will give you some more ideas for who you can partner with. And, you know, perhaps it goes without saying, but I'm trying to suggest things, places, organizations that are bigger than you and that maybe are reaching a different audience than you to try and increase awareness of who you are. What partner stuff have you done lately or have you been considering?
You know, Jane, I haven't because I thought I didn't have a cred.
Ah,
You know, I really thought like, why would any of those? Now there is someone, just Trish Hopkinson, who's such a wonderful ambassador of poetry. When she promoted the session a day that I started when lockdown happened, I got so many new people from that. So I know it worked, and I just need to have more confidence in. I need to certify myself to reach out. You know what
yes,
I mean?
I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do. Um, Trish Hopkinson, I had not heard that name before, and it feels like it was just like someone I should have known before you mentioned her. It just didn't. And when I visited her website, I noticed, is it true her blog has kind of retired? I mean, the site's still there, but she
Yeah.
seems to be stepping back from it. Is that the
Yes,
case?
that's correct.
To me, that says opportunity. Not that you want to take up her website or her blog, but whatever space she was filling or whatever content she was putting out there, any series that she ran, any critique I don't know, whatever it was she did, someone needs to be filling those shoes. Not all of, not fully, but there might be something there for you. Okay, I've gotten to the end of my like prepared comments. So do you have questions you'd like to ask me, Marge, about anything I didn't address or go back to something?
I don't think so, Jane. That was so helpful.
Oh, good.
I don't have more words right now. That was tremendous. Thank you for all that attention and thoughtfulness.
My pleasure. Um, if you're able to stick around, I'll go through some of the Q&A. Is that all right? Okay. So I'm just going to go from the top here. We've got Zita say, this is a student of yours, I think. Marge's poetry workshops have made me a better fiction writer. Is there something on the website that addresses the broad benefit of Marge's teaching? Great marketing idea. And we also need to have Zita give you that as a formal testimonial, I think. We've got a question. Would you say to have a separate website for teaching an editorial business than an author website, where the author website has to address, that I'm also an author. Generally, I say don't have two websites until you think it's absolutely necessary, just because it's more work, more things to go wrong, more things to manage. So, I mean, I'm an author and I have a business. I have lots of different moving pieces to my business, and it's still under one website. The one thing I do have a separate website for is my paid newsletter, because I do consider that a separate business, and it is, in fact, legally a separate business. But otherwise, at least in your case, Marge, I would see no reason, even if you had half a dozen books, to separate that out from what you're currently doing. Kathy says, I teach fiction writing through different online venues, and I've noticed a decline in people who sign up. I've had the feeling that the decline in interest correlates to the increase in self-publishing, and that folks don't feel they need to pay for classes because they don't believe they need the help or the knowledge. And then Chris is adding, I noticed signups decreased once the pandemic resolved. Diana says, as a Zoom fan, I've enjoyed more such platforms as Canvas, where it's all post and comment versus video. So yeah, I think there's more competition today, perhaps, than there was, like, let's say in 2019, 2020, because the pandemic turned a lot of people into online teachers when they didn't know they had it in them. And I think they also saw how convenient and time saving it was on the teaching side, especially. Not so much travel, not so much expense. But I mean, just speaking for myself, I feel like registrations for me have been pretty consistent as someone with a very solid platform, solid email list. So I think there's still plenty of potential out there. It's still possible to grow, but you may need to have a more unique selling position than before. You may need to do a little bit, more housekeeping on, the marketing descriptions and how everything is cohering, like we discussed with Marge. Julie mentions that some people might misunderstand what webinar means and assume that it is not an interactive experience. And other people are saying, yeah, I've kind of thought that as well. So that's an interesting point, Marge, for your overhaul, is thinking about, instead of saying webinars, say online classes. And, now to think of it, that's what it says on my site. I don't say webinar. It's interesting, how use of a single word can dramatically affect whether or not someone's interested. So yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. Switch it to online classes. Shelley's wondering, regarding disappointing classes, what are the most common complaints that I hear? Oh boy, under pressure. I actually have notes about this. Hold on. Because obviously I get a lot of feedback on classes. Give me just a second so I can pull up my list, because I know people will be fascinated in it. Hold on. Okay, here we go. This is the big list. Plan to listen to the recording later, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on dissecting everything. Focus on how and not so much on why or what. And basically what this means is people love to learn how to do things tactically, what they need to do. Critique would probably be a great example of how, like when you show before and after, or you show poor, improved, that sort of thing. When you talk about what or why, you're just talking about a principle. You're talking like big picture. It's more intellectual, but people don't necessarily know what that looks in concrete, tangible form. So there's actually an article out there on this. I didn't come up with this myself, called Super Specific How. I'm going to drop this into the chat if I can find the chat again. Hold on. Here we go. There we go. Super Specific How. So you can explore that idea in that article. This is simple, but if your marketing description promises something, it needs to be in the webinar. A lot of people just miss that simple that simple requirement. Um, Sometimes people will describe a class as being for very broadly for fiction writers, let's say. But then when you get into the class, they're talking about fiction in a way that presumes everyone cares about having, let's say, a protagonist who changes. And immediately you're going to get the mystery writers say, my protagonist does not change. This class does not apply to me. So sometimes we bring assumptions into the class, in other words, about who's attending. And so I often will push instructors to be more specific about who's going to benefit, and even adding language about who might not want to take the class. You know, sometimes children's writers are an exception to what you're teaching, or another thing that becomes really complicated is if you're teaching a class about storytelling and you say it's about fiction and nonfiction, which will attract memoir people. But then you have no examples of memoir. It's all fiction. And so what's going to happen? Every single memoirist is going to say, these are all fiction examples. Where am I represented in this? So you have to be really careful about that piece and being disciplined about who you're speaking to and not trying to cast the net bigger, because you'll just get people disappointed that they weren't included. This is probably it's obvious, but it still happens a lot, selling yourself too much. So if you try to, if people feel like if people feel like there's been a bait and switch, if the class seems like it's building up to something really cool, and then the cool thing isn't delivered, and you have to take another class or you have to pay or whatever it happens to be, it's just massive disappointment all around. You know, you don't want to show something to people or dangle it in front of them as this thing that helped you succeed, but now you have to go pay for that portion of it. And then I think the other thing would be repeating ideas too frequently or otherwise padding the presentation to lengthen it with repetition of ideas. Especially, I think this is really particular to online. People have short attention spans. They're not very patient. This is also a reason why you typically want to get underway very quickly with the class, rather than having like 15 minutes of warm up. A warm up could be introductions, talking about yourself, describing really basic principles. You know, you just want to cut to the chase and get to the real meat of the matter, I would say within the first 5 minutes if you can. And then obviously there are just things that, you know, people are sometimes disorganized or they don't look particularly prepared. And when people are paying for a class, they do not appreciate that, of course. So I hope that's helpful. Do you have any wisdom to share, Marge? Anything you've learned over the years?
Yeah, I'll just affirm that, Jane, that um I'm really paying attention to how a teacher manages time, and the registrants taking too long to you know, introduce themselves or whatever. I'm really hypersensitive to that as a payer.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I would say, anyway, just agreeing with you, that
yeah,
really pisses me off
yeah,
when I lose confidence in the facilitator right away.
yeah. Yeah, the first 5 to 10 minutes with an instructor you've never experienced before is so important. Um, it's all about first impressions, and if people feel like you're not really showing up, you're not there, you're disorganized, there's tech trouble, you just lose people so fast. I'm not going to say people are unforgiving necessarily, but it's really hard to recover if the opening isn't powerful and well thought through. Floor says, I've used other people's organizations or following as a platform for teaching, but find I'm bringing the students in most of the time. Is there a pro con to this? So Floor, if you're the one who's the draw rather than the organization, like if it sounds to me like you've got a bigger platform than the people you're partnering with, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you want to make sure that you're being compensated appropriately. So what I would say is if you're bringing your fame and your personality ask for a bigger cut of the registration fees. Let's see. Oh, there's an anonymous suggestion here for you, Marge, about having a short instructional video, like a couple minutes on a similar subject, as a way to give them a taste for your classes. I've gone even further than that. I have sometimes, this has been years ago, when I have like a 6, 8, 12 week class, I will make the first one free to everybody. Especially that helps with the new people who aren't sure if it's going to be worth their time. So I'm more generous. And I find that over time, the more you need new and different students, the more generous you are. And as you get the students you want, you become maybe less generous. Beth says, I know I'd probably have a stronger income if I offered recordings of my workshops, but the topics we discuss tend to be private. And so I avoid offering that. I prefer my students to be there or be square. But am I making a mistake? And then Chris mentions that's why I don't record my classes either. But Chris does offer the handouts and the PowerPoints. Marge, I know that you do offer recordings, and I think they're available for quite some time. I can't remember the span, but people can just come in for the recording. I would say that you're definitely, I mean, everyone has to make their own decision about this, but I think if you get someone to register and you have a way, and they're not going to come live, I have never had, to my knowledge, someone really abuse that, like share the recording somewhere else. Or I've never had anyone come to me and say, I can't, this thing I shared in your webinar is now out floating around in public. That hasn't occurred. It doesn't mean it wouldn't happen. But I would push against both Beth and Chris here to think about trying at least one class where it's recorded, make sure everyone knows it's being recorded, and then just have some guardrails, make sure the recording is protected in some way. And that if people are uncomfortable with their work being discussed, that they don't discuss it, or that you cut that out of the recording. That's another way to do it, where you can just segment off the more personal sharing stuff if possible, and then just have the recording of the main, like the curriculum or the presentation or the instructor. Someone's asking me to confirm the self-study lady I mentioned, the one who does it for memoir, the model to follow if you want to self-study as a prerequisite. That was Marion Roach Smith. And now since we're now approaching the 90-minute mark, I am scanning for questions that I really think we ought to answer before we go. So hold on. There's a question about the positioning statement. Can you please clarify where one would use a positioning statement? Is positioning an internal guide to your marketing? Yes, definitely internal, 110%. It can also be external. It's just, there's too many variables for me to say when it would be external versus when it wouldn't be. But I do think it helps. You could certainly put a statement that, said something like, for Marge, teaching poetry so it's accessible to all. And I'm not saying that's what you should use, because I think it's a little bit off for you, but I do think that can be very useful at the top of the classes page. But it can be, like, if you're teaching across multiple genres, that can sometimes be difficult to just have one statement. So, but I do think the way I discussed it as far as our class today, it was more for internal positioning and knowing, thinking about how, because I think it helps clarify how are you going to reach those people? What sort of lead generation do you want to use with those people? So it just helps the next steps are much clearer when you have that positioning. Yolanda asks, as far as tech solutions, do I recommend one format or platform for delivering the digital product? So this would be, I think, probably like for the recording. Marge, how do you handle your recordings?
I pay extra for Zoom's cloud because it makes sense in terms of how much I want to store,
Yeah.
and it saves me the time of downloading to Dropbox
Yeah.
and paying for Dropbox. So I like it that it's there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great solution for most instructors. And I would recommend that as a starting point for most people if you're going to be offering recordings, because it's just like if you're already using Zoom, that is, it just makes a ton of sense to keep it there. Um, as for me, I do have the recordings embedded on my website. So people end up coming to my website. And part of that is because we have quite a bit of follow-up material, and we allow people to download like just the audio or get the transcript or get a Q&A. So we have all of that prepared on my website, but the videos and the other materials, anything of a large file size isn't actually stored on my website. It's stored at Vimeo, or it's stored on Google Drive, because one thing you do not want to do is have people download large files from your website. Your hosting company will shut you down if you have very high volume of that going on. So make sure that if you are offering these downloads, it's stored in the cloud somewhere. Vimeo, I think, is a choice for a lot of people that offer video downloads. Okay, I'm going to stop there and be respectful of everyone's time. Marge, anything else you want to say or add
No,
or
I'm
ask?
just so touched by everyone's kindness in the chat, and um honestly, Jane, you are super generous, and that's all. I'm just really grateful. You just changed my life.
I'm honored to have been able to help you. And I would love an update. I think everyone here would probably love an update at some point. Not
Yeah.
tomorrow, not in 2 months, but after you've had time to make some changes and think about what's next. So it certainly made me think more about what I'm doing, as as Marge, I'm sure when you teach something, you start thinking a lot more deeply about what in the world you are doing yourself. Thank you all so much for joining me today. This has been recorded and it will appear on my YouTube channel, uh, most likely by the end of the day, so you can revisit it. Hope to see you again. Bye-bye.